Your instructors are Chef Bill Brewa and Chef Patrick Clark. Chef Brewa is a chef instructor at the Culinary Institute of America at Greystone, where he has developed curricula and has taught cooking, flavor dynamics, gastronomy, and food and wine pairing for the past 15 years. A certified executive chef and certified hospitality educator, Chef Brewa has worked extensively in the hospitality industry and has owned and operated his own bistro. He has been a speaker at many professional conferences, and his writing on food, wine, and cooking has been featured in Fine Cooking, Mise en Place, and Sunset magazines. Chef Clark is a chef instructor at the Culinary Institute of America at Greystone, where he has developed curricula and taught a wide range of culinary topics. He is a graduate of the California Culinary Academy and a certified hospitality educator. Chef Clark came to the CIA from Sutro's restaurant in San Francisco's historic Cliff House, where he won accolades for his farm-fresh California coastal cuisine. He has been a presenter at numerous professional conferences and has traveled to teach and study cuisines across the United States and in Mexico, the Mediterranean, and Europe. The Culinary Institute of America is the world's premier culinary college, setting the standard for excellence in professional culinary education for more than 6 decades.
Hi there, my name is Chef Bill Brewa. I'm an instructor here at the Culinary Institute of America in California's Napa Valley. The school stands behind me, but we're out of doors, just above the herb terrace, so that we can set up live fire grills. This course is really all about grilling. We're going to show you some of the grilling traditions from around the world. We're going to show you a lot of different equipment, different fuels, different recipes, and different techniques. I've invited my colleague, Chef Patrick Clark, to join me on this because he is a great chef, one, but also understands a lot about grilling, and will share the task of teaching you about grilling at home. Now, if you come over here, I have a grill, and it's fired with raw wood. This is oak that I have here. About an hour and a half ago, I brought the oak over here, and I set a fire. I began with crumpled up paper, and then on top of the paper, crumpled up cardboard, and then I held that in place with kindling, sticks of kindling, and finally the logs go on top. I reached for a torch. You could reach for a match as easily. I set the paper on fire, now the cardboard's on fire, now the kindling, and ultimately the logs begin to burn. But that process takes time. It took a full hour and a half for those logs to, one, catch fire, and then once all the volatile compounds had burnt off, they reduced down to a bed of coals, and that's what I have here right now. An hour and a half is a long time, so this is maybe not the most efficient fuel to use when you're grilling. But the reason we started here is because at some point in our collective past, mankind stumbled upon fire and shortly afterwards likely stumbled upon the first cooked food. Now, cooked food is safer to eat. Some people would tell you that cooked food is easier to digest, and we've taught ourselves to believe that cooked food is tastier. And if you want to learn about cooked food, you can come to the Culinary Institute of America and we'll teach you everything you want to know. But there's something so basic, so elemental about cooking over live fire that I think it speaks to all of us, especially at this time of the year in the summer when you want to be out of doors. And so that's why this course on grilling. Now, a quick word or two about grilling over wood. There's lots of different kinds of wood. I'm working over oak. I like it because it's very dense and it burns for a long time and sort of consistently. But there are other woods that are less dense, and while they catch light quickly, they don't burn for very long. Sort of a flash in the pan. There are woods that give a tremendous amount of smoke and really aggressive smoke. Things like mesquite and hickory that I don't like to work over unless I'm making barbecue. Nut woods give a softer smoke and not much of it, especially when you have a dense wood. Fruit woods will even give you sort of a sweet smoke, things like apple wood. But for our purposes, I think oak is a really nice idea. Takes a long time to light, takes a lot of fuel to get a bed of coals. It's a little unpredictable, but it's a great place to start because this is really where it all began. Now, because we have the fire ready to go, let's talk a little bit about what the French call mise en place. In the American kitchen, you can call it having your mess in place or being prepared. So there's a number of tools I'd like to talk about. Here as an example is 2 spatulas. This one has a handle that angles up, which keeps your hand away from the heat. But let's say you have a big piece of fish, it may be more valuable to have a larger surface to keep that fish from breaking and falling through the bars onto the fire below. Tongs are an essential piece of equipment, and maybe somewhere in your garage you have a big packet of barbecue tools that look something like this. I would take it to Goodwill and forget about it. These are not real tools, they're sort of show tools. Tongs like this, I would say, are a much better idea, but take a look. These are too short, and the problem with that is that your hand gets so close to the fire, you can't keep them there. Shorter tongs give you more control, but if your hand is burnt, you have no control at all. So something a little bit longer like this, I would say, is more appropriate. I'm going to set those aside. I'll show you. Here's one long pair of tongs. And we use this to move coals around. While it's very, very easy for me to stay away from the fire, the longer the tools are, the less control you have. Okay? I don't think it's a bad idea. If you've got some sort of a tool, like a hoe, or I've got an Indian tool, something you don't really care about for moving coals around, this is not a bad idea to have. All right, let me set these aside. When you're grilling, cleaning the grill is a good idea. So here's a small grill brush right here, and here is the one that ordinarily I use. This one is much larger, and it's appropriate for a large grill like this. So basically what this does is it brushes off any foods that don't burn off the grill. Yours at home likely will be a little bit smaller like this one right here, but you need a brush to clean the grill. Once the grill is clean, oftentimes I will take a small amount of oil and dip a rolled up rag into that oil and just wipe the bars. And that keeps food from sticking to the grill, but more than that, it takes any soot or dirt that might be on the grill and wipes it off. Okay, towels are a tremendous asset, rags even, things that you don't mind getting dirty and sooty. Having those on hand so that you can mop up any little bit of a mess, I think is important. Here's 2 more tools. A whip, and this really is standing in for all the work that should happen inside your house in the kitchen, or in our case, in the kitchen behind me. I've got students back here that are busy preparing food. You want to get the food brought to the point or prepared to the point that you can bring it outside and really enjoy the process of grilling without feeling as though you need to whip or fold or chop or whatever it might be. If you cook meat, determining doneness is an important idea, and we'll show you some great techniques for pressing on meat to see how cooked it is. But you might want to invest in a meat thermometer like this. This is a digital one, which makes your life very, very easy because all protein responds exactly the same way to temperature. So if you know you want your steak cooked medium, you can choose the right temperature, right around 135 degrees, and you'll get a perfectly cooked steak. Let me set that aside. When you bring things to the grill, think about unbreakable containers, and if they can be disposable, so much the better. So those don't break and scatter glass everywhere, because if there's glass near your food, you're better off just discarding the food. Stay hydrated. Water is a great choice, as is beer, but make sure that the container you're drinking out of is not breakable. So something plastic like this that can be dropped, or just a little water bottle, I think, is appropriate. I like to have a selection of seasonings, certainly salt and pepper at the grill. You don't want to have to run inside for that. Sometimes all the food needs is a little squeeze of acid, so I like to bring some lemons along, spoons for tasting, and a little bit of oil, a simple salad oil that can withstand high heat, canola oil, peanut oil, that you can use to wipe the bars clean or oil your food before it goes on the grill. Those are important ideas. The rookie mistake in grilling is to bring your food from the kitchen on a plate, grill it, and then put it back on the same plate. Especially bad if we're talking about protein, because then you set the stage for cross-contamination. So always have a clean plate to put your cooked food on. Other disposables that you might like to have on hand, latex gloves. These are great if you don't have the wherewithal to wash your hands at the grill. Just put them on and then peel them off and discard them. Foils, Ziploc bags, because they're disposable, are really nice to have on hand. And then, before I leave you, we need to talk about safety, because at the end of the day, this is live fire. So we have a nice fire extinguisher that we always keep right down here next to the grill. You may already have a small one at home. Have it available. If you don't have it, maybe a bucket of water or even a bucket of dirt. Fire loves oxygen, so if you can starve it of oxygen, you can put it out. Also, pay attention to what's around your grill. Don't set your grill up right next to the gas can that you use to fill your lawnmower, or right next to a pile of leaves that's infinitely flammable. Instead, clean an area around your grill so that you're comfortable that you won't inadvertently set fire to something. Even pay attention to what's above the grill. You know, if there's overhanging branches or a deck, those are both bad ideas. Last thing, take a look at what I did here. I had on hand a bus tub, something that I could put all this stuff into. It may be a tray in your house, but some way to gather together any dirty dishes or things that you don't need so that you can take them back to the kitchen and clean up as a snap. That's all I have to say about mise en place. What I'd like to do now is invite my colleague Patrick Clark in to show you some great techniques that have to do with working over a grill.
For our first recipe, we're going to look at live fire and two different ingredients that I'm going to utilize with live fire in two very different preparations. The first of which is some vegetables here. Ironically, both of these ingredients are going to find their way into a salad. So here I have some beautiful red endive and some beautiful red onions. I'm going to start with the endive. I'm going to take this little core section off of the bottom of these guys. I'm going to place them in this bowl here. The red onions have already been prepared. So I'm going to take 3 of those slices, place them in the bowl here as well. And I'm going to season these with a little bit of salt and pepper. And then I'm going to use some olive oil. Here I'm going to use extra virgin olive oil because I want it to be both a flavoring agent and a lubricating agent. So we're trying to keep things from sticking to the grill. We also use fat as a way to conduct heat. Fat's an excellent conductor of heat. So by putting a layer of fat on there, it enables the heat to transfer into the product much more efficiently. And you'll hear me talk a lot about that because it's a really important step in terms of heat transfer. So I want to coat these pretty well with that oil, and then I'm going to get them right on the grill. Grill is nice and hot. I've got a series of different zones on the grill. We'll talk about zone grilling. So I have a cool zone over here to the left where it's not very hot at all. I can hold my hand there for an extended period of time. I have a hot spot right here in the center of the grill where I can really only hold my hand there for about 3 seconds or so. And then I've got a moderate spot on the grill right over here where I can hold my hand for about 5 seconds before it starts to get too uncomfortable. So one of the challenges with cooking with live fire is we all know the challenges of grilling and managing food on the surface. Now we also have to manage our fuel source at the bottom at the same time. So let's get these guys on. And I'm going to go right to my hot spot here because I want to get a nice little char on these, some nice grill marks, some nice coloring. Press these down because I want to make sure that I get nice even caramelization. The caramelization is how heat affects sugars in food. And again, we'll talk a lot more about that through the series as well. Now for my second preparation, I have some beautiful golden beets here. These have been washed, and really that's the only preparation needed. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take these beets and I'm going to put them directly into the coals, into the embers that I've created with my live fire. Now, what I've done is basically utilize a direct form of heat transfer in transferring the heat from those coals into the beets. And what I end up with is something that's really not all that pretty, but tastes delicious. So I've roasted the outside of this, formed a bit of a crust through that roasting process. So now I'm going to utilize a towel and some water to kind of break that crust down. So as I peel this back, I reveal the beautiful color of the golden beet underneath. And what I've done is I've not only caramelized the outside of this, which gives it flavor, but I've also extracted a lot of water from this. There's a lot of evaporation that took place in those coals. So the sweetness and the flavor of the beet is really, really concentrated at this point. So I have some water here to kind of help me clean this up just a bit. I want to get all of that crust off of there. But I want to leave some of this caramelization on the outside. So there's a difference. There's a little caramelized residue of the skin, or not the skin, a residue of the surface of the beet where the skin was previously attached. And then there's the crust that was formerly the skin, which we want to get off. So we'll just set that there, dispense with our mess. We always want to clean as you go as a chef or a cook. Nobody wants to work around a messy kitchen. And no one wants to work around a messy chef. Now that our beets are peeled, let's go back and take a look at our vegetables on the grill. So I'm just going to turn these over. These cook pretty quickly. They're fairly delicate. The onions, on the other hand, going to take a little bit longer. So I'm going to rotate these 45 degrees. And I do that with most everything that goes on the grill because that's a great way to not only have nice aesthetics in terms of attractive grill marks where you get the crosshash markings, but it also transfers heat more evenly and cooks products more evenly. So while those are finishing up, we're going to come back to our beets here. We're going to slice these up. I'm going to cut these, I think, into little wedges so you can see the beautiful color of that beet on the inside. And they pick up a little bit of a smoky aroma from the coals and from the wood, so you get this kind of sweet, smoky flavor in the beet. It's really, really delicious. Really nice coloring on those. The sugar, the caramelization, and the onions surfacing there and showing up as browning. So next we're going to start our assembly here. So I have this beautiful platter. I have some nice greens here, a mixture of different greens. So I want to just put a sprinkling of those. And I'm not going to season these greens. I'm going to dress this whole salad. This is going to be what we call a composed salad. So it's going to have several different elements, and they'll all be placed separately on the salad, as opposed to tossing everything in the same salad and having all the ingredients together. So I'm going to start placing the beets. Those are obviously strong component in the salad, so we want to have lots of those. Next, we'll pull our endive off of the grill. And I'm just going to go directly on here with this, so I don't mind a little warm, cold sort of character to the salad. And then for our onions, I'm going to take this example here because it's already coming apart for me. I have the nice rings that I can use to garnish the salad with. And then I'm going to finish that off with some goat cheese. I'm just going to crumble some goat cheese right on the top. Kind of make it even sort of smattering here. Really nice fresh goat cheese. You can see that's a layer of vegetable ash on the outside of this as well. And then I have a few olives, some Kalamata olives. And finally, I'm going to dress this, and I'm just going to dress this with simply extra virgin olive oil. And some aged balsamic vinegar. So this is a real syrupy balsamic vinegar. They age it through a series of different barrels, utilizing smaller and smaller barrels to minimize the oxygenation. And it turns into this syrupy, delicious mixture after about 12 years. And so here we have our beautiful coal roasted beet salad with grilled endive, grilled red onions, and goat cheese. Since we're here in the Napa Valley, it was important that we started out with the obligatory composed vegetable salad garnished with goat cheese. Now when we finish with that, let's get to some meat. Here I have two different steaks. I have a thin steak and I have a thick steak. We're going to get to the thick steak a little bit later, but right now I want to talk about our thin steak, which is skirt steak. Skirt steak is a really wonderful steak. It's sort of chewy and firm, but has really delicious flavor, and it cooks relatively quickly. So it's a pretty easy steak to prepare, pretty versatile. You see it used in fajitas, you see it served as it's on its own. Today we're going to pair it with some asparagus and sort of an Asian style preparation. So I'm going to start off with a dry rub. So a dry rub is a mixture of spices, usually salt, and we use that in an effort to flavor meat. And it's a dry seasoning, so we flavor meat without adding any moisture to it. And we'll talk about why that's important when we get to the big steak. So we have salt in here. We also have some fennel seed and some coriander seed. So salt, black pepper, fennel seed, and coriander seed. And I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of this on here. And then we call it a dry rub because we're going to just sort of rub that into the meat. So the salt in this basically does two things. It flavors the meat, but it also acts as a bacterial kill step. So bacteria lives only on the surface of meat, and it comes to us through contact with air, any number of things. But basically, that's the only place in meat that bacteria exists. So we don't see bacteria internally in meat, only on the surface. So by applying salt to the outside, most bacteria don't like salt. So we're going to take this dry rub meat now, we're going to bring it right over to the grill. But first, I'm going to take a little bit of oil, and I'm going to use this oil to lubricate my grill. Nice clean grill, items won't stick, and the oil also acts as a bit of a catalyst to get that heat transfer into the meat as well. So you can hear that sizzle on there. That's what we like to hear. That means the water is being expelled from the meat very quickly. And by expelling the water from the meat very quickly, we achieve a couple of different results, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. So I have some beautiful asparagus here. And the asparagus I'm going to dress just with a little bit of olive oil and a little bit of salt and pepper. And it too is going to go on the grill. Just want to coat the oil evenly on these guys. Just kind of run them through my fingers so they all touch the platter. And then I'm going to be very careful about how I place these guys on the grill. So if I just drop these on the grill like this, stand a good chance of losing them through the grates in the grill as they begin to get more tender and soft. So I want to slide these off in this direction so that they stay on the grill. I don't really want to be dropping asparagus down into my fire at the tune of $7.99 a pound, right? So spread these guys out so I get surface contact with all the pieces. Try and keep them all in a little row like nice uniform soldiers there. And that's going to enable me to cook those evenly, and it's also going to help me to manage them more effectively. So now that I have these going, skirt steak's going to cook pretty quickly. So if I pull up the corner here, I can see I've already got some nice grill marks going in that direction. I'm sure I have the same effect on this piece here. So now I'm going to cross these 45 degrees. And again, we do that for evenness of cooking, and we also do that for nice attractive grill marks. Now my asparagus, you can see they're actually starting to move on here, so they're starting to crisp up and get a little bit of toast on them, which is exactly what we want. So at this point, I'm going to start at the top, and I'm just going to kind of roll these with my hand. If you're not used to sticking your hand on hot fire like I am, if you dip your hand in a little bit of water first, just to cool it off, what we're trying to do is get all the surface of the asparagus exposed to the heat of the grill grates. So look at these beautiful asparagus now. You can see they picked up some color from the grill. Also, when I pick one up, it's much less firm than it was before. They've started to soften up, which is exactly what we want to see. So with the asparagus, one of the reasons I keep them all lined up like this is because at this point it becomes much easier for me. Instead of chasing 20 pieces of asparagus around on the grill, I can just slide my tongs underneath and get them all picked up relatively easily. I'm just going to let these huddle here and stay warm for a minute while I check on my skirt steak. So I'm touching the skirt steak, and I'm looking for resistance on the surface of the skirt steak. So I can tell by the feel of this that it's cooked nice and medium rare. This piece is quite a bit thinner, so it's going to be cooked more like medium well, maybe even well done on certain parts, because I've got quite a variance in the thickness of the skirt steak. So that's the beautiful thing about skirt steak. It's got a great flavor, whether it's cooked well done or medium rare, and especially with that dry rub, we've really developed a lot of flavor here. So I'm going to pull this over to the cool part of the grill here, and I'm going to let that rest for a minute, and we'll talk a little bit more about what resting is in a moment. In the meantime, I'm going to start to platter my asparagus. So I have a beautiful platter here. So I'm going to place these in the center, and I'm just going to keep the bottoms of them together as best as I can, and I'm going to try to fan this out to sort of cover the expanse of this large plate here. Slide that over. Skirt steak, being a fairly thin piece of meat, doesn't require a lot of resting. When we get to the large steak, we'll talk more about resting there and why that's so important with larger cuts of meat. So with this, I'm just going to slice this into 3 or 4 different slices on the big piece. Arrange those. And now I have a little vinaigrette here. This is a hoisin vinaigrette. Hoisin is an Asian-style barbecue sauce. It's got kind of a sweet, sour sort of flavor profile to it. We have some fresh garlic in here, some ginger, some sesame oil, and we're just going to drizzle some of this right over the top of this. So on the asparagus. And then I'm going to go right over the meat as well. And then finally, I'm going to garnish this with, I have some sliced scallions, and these have been sliced on a bias cut, which is at an angle set, an angular reference. We call that a bias cut. And then I have some orange supremes here, which is basically just cherry picking the best part of the orange, getting rid of the stem, or the skin rather, the seeds, and the white pith that's on the interior of those. Some scallions on the asparagus as well. So, beautiful plate of food here. We've got our dry rub skirt steak, grilled asparagus, and hoisin vinaigrette. Now we've finished with our little steak. Let's talk about our big steak. This is a New York steak, and this is cut about 2 inches thick. 2 inches is going to take a lot more time to cook than that skirt steak did. So as you start looking at different thicknesses of meat, you have an exponential variance in how long it takes to cook. So it's not going to take 3 times as long to cook this steak. It's going to take a lot longer. So as you can see, there's a lot of seasoning on the plate and on the steak here. What I've done is I've pre-seasoned the steak. What pre-seasoning does is it takes a piece of meat that's really large like this, and it allows us to start absorbing the flavors of those seasonings into the meat. And it also allows us to start drying out that meat. Salt is a drying agent. When we put salt on meat, which is about 70% water, it starts to pull the water out of that meat, which is essentially what we're doing when we're cooking. We're trying to take the water out of the meat, denature the proteins, firm up the flesh of this steak so that it's much more palatable and also much more tasty. So, pre-seasoning, just salt and pepper on this so far. So it's going to go directly onto our hot grill now. But first I want to take a look at some of the spots on the grill and how hot our grill is. So again, using live fire, we have to constantly manage the grill, constantly add more fuel to it. Otherwise, we're in the middle of cooking and we have no more fire. So I'm using my hand to determine heat here. I've got a real hot spot right here. So that's going to be probably where I start the steak. I want to get that steak in a very hot spot, sear the outside of it. By searing the outside, we mean form a crust on the outside, get that surface moisture out of the steak, and get that steak started cooking. Once you form a crust, the water just beneath the surface of that crust begins to boil and it penetrates. Heat goes from a higher concentration to a lesser concentration naturally, so that heat begins to penetrate the meat. So I'm going to go ahead and get this started. I've got a hot zone here, and I've got all 3 zones working now, and I'm going to use all 3 of the zones on this in the preparation of this steak. So I'm not going to oil this steak. Oftentimes I put oil on food, and the reason is the steak already has a lot of oil. So it's got a rim of fat on the top there, and you'll notice this is an inclined grill, so it's sloping down toward me. I'm always going to want to keep that fat on the high side of that grill, so as the fat melts, it runs down the bottom of the steak, it bastes the steak. If I turn that around and put the fat on the bottom, all the fat drains off. The other thing I'm going to have to keep an eye on here is flare-ups. With a fatty piece of meat like this, that fat renders, it turns into a liquid fat, and then it drops down into the coals. When it drops down into the coals, it ignites and it causes flame. Flame puts off volatile chemicals that we really don't want in our food. It also puts off a black soot that makes things really unattractive. So as this thing's sizzling away, I can tell it's doing exactly what I want it to do. So as this cooks, as that crust forms, we have 2 different reactions occurring here on a scientific level. The first reaction we've all heard of is caramelization. Caramelization is when you apply high heat to sugars, those sugars brown and transform the color and the flavor of those sugars. Well, sugar is in meat, sugar is in vegetables, sugar is in everything. So the sugars in the meat are caramelizing. The other reaction that's taking place is something we call the Maillard reaction. The Maillard reaction is a much more complex reaction. It involves both sugars, carbohydrates, and amino acids, proteins. So same sort of idea. It creates the browning, sort of roasty flavors that we expect in meat. It's also what causes the crust on bread. It's what causes coffee to taste like it does, chocolate. All of those things are victims of that Maillard reaction and caramelization both. So now that that's cooking away, I'm going to take a look at some mushrooms. These are called king trumpet mushrooms. They're one of my favorite mushrooms. They have a real sort of earthy, meaty quality about them. In fact, they're so earthy and meaty that they actually make a great meat substitute. So if meat's not your thing and you still like to grill, I highly recommend these guys. They're really, really tasty. So I'm going to season with a little bit of salt and pepper. And before I move on with those, I think I'm going to cross my steak. So I mentioned that 45-degree rotation. You can see, I'm sure that I have some nice grill marks developed there already. That crust is formed. So I'm just going to cross that 45 degrees. I'm going to keep it right in that same hot zone for the time being. And now let's come back and dress these with some olive oil. Mushrooms are kind of like sponges. They'll take as much oil as you throw at them, and they'll just continue to absorb and absorb. So I just want to get the outside of these guys well coated. That olive oil is going to add flavor as well as fat to these guys. So let's get these on the grill. So I'm going to put these at an angle, and I'm going to put them all in a row. And what this enables me to do is keep track of what I have going on the grill. So if I just randomly place things all over the grill and then I go to cross these, I may forget which ones I need to cross, which ones have been crossed. If I keep things in nice, even, concise rows like this, I can go back and go boom, 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 right down the row and cross each one. Then I know they've all been crossed. And then I know when it's time to turn, etc., etc. So it looks like our steak and our mushrooms are ready. I'm going to move this steak over here to the edge of the grill where it's nice and cool, and I'm going to let that rest for a moment. Resting is the activity in water slowing down. So as we pull that off the grill, right now the water activity is moving very rapidly within that steak. If I just cut into that steak right away, I'm going to have a lot of moisture coming out of there. So what I want to do is let those juices sort of slow, let that water activity slow. And then when I go to cut into the steak, I won't have that kind of moisture loss. So I have some compound butter here. Compound butter basically is butter with some sort of flavorings in it. We have a mixture of herbs in this, some garlic. And I'm just going to put a few tabs of this compound butter right onto my steak. And I'm going to let those start to melt as that steak rests. So our steak is now fully rested, and I'm going to slice the steak. You see I have the compound butter on here. It hasn't fully melted yet, and that's by design. So what I want this compound butter as it melts on the surface to just kind of fall down in the cracks of this steak. Then I'm going to use my knife like a spatula and just carry this whole thing over. And then I'm just going to fan this out so I can see the beautiful color inside the meat. This is nice and perfect medium rare, as you can see inside here. And that butter is just going to continue to melt right on into that. And then I have some juice on the board here and a little bit of compound butter, and I don't want to waste that. So I'm just going to use my knife to sort of scoop that up and carry that right over to our steak, and that's what we call a little board sauce. And so here we have our fire-roasted New York steak, king trumpet mushrooms, and compound butter.